What is up, everyone? Today I will be talking about the Nelson Mandela Autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom. This book details Mandela's struggle against apartheid in South Africa. So naturally, there's a lot of history about Mandela and, more importantly, about South Africa and about apartheid, the struggle against apartheid, why apartheid was bad, and how the issue of apartheid was resolved in South Africa and how the struggle was ultimately successful at overthrowing the apartheid government in a way that was definitely a revolution, but not really like a American Revolution or French Revolution where, there's many muskets. There was definitely an armed aspect to the struggle, but it was a lot more negotiations and nonviolent protest and things of that nature. And overall, I think I can recommend this book to anyone. Obviously, the history is very great and very important when talking about any nonfiction book that involves nation states and revolution and politics and all that sort of stuff. But I think this book excels at having themes that go beyond just talking about the history and just talking about the struggle. And these themes of like resilience and forgiveness and compromise and listening and coming to agreements and stuff like that, I think these themes are universal and relevant to everyone, no matter what country you're from. Mandela himself is, of course, a very shrewd and charismatic and skilled politician and a very skilled revolutionary as well. Sometimes it's hard for some people throughout history to be good at both revolution and governing after the revolution. That's always something that's tricky. And I think that's a lot of why Nelson Mandela was so revered. And there's an Mlk quote about power and love. The quote is, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic." And this is what Mandela was very good at understanding and implementing into the struggle, because of course Mandela was uncompromising in wanting to end apartheid and wanting freedom, wanting liberties, wanting a government that he could participate in. Obviously, in an apartheid government, only some people can vote. Of course, in apartheid South Africa, only white people could vote, and there was a lot of separation, segregation from races. Apartheid literally means apartness. So yeah, basically segregation, more or less. And of course, for Mandela, the love was the struggle against apartheid. But this book is more about how to get power when you more or less have none of the power. So Mandela joins the struggle after he moves to Johannesburg, and this is right after World War II, where the nationalist government of South Africa gains a lot of power, and this is a political party that is totally in line with the Axis powers of World War II, even though obviously the Axis lost, but they had the same idea, same general principles, and that's why they implemented apartheid, because they were racist, because they were white supremacist, pretty explicitly. So yeah, they're consolidating power in the government and kind of making it very difficult for other political parties to be in the process at all. Nelson Mandela joins the African National Congress, which has been a political party for decades at that point. And it's tough to have power in South Africa because the ANC couldn't really vote. They couldn't do a lot of things, but they could organize strikes, protests, they could protest various aspects of apartheid, they could protest schools, because obviously the schools were totally segregated. They were forced to live in different neighborhoods from white people, and actually there's somewhat sizable Indian population in South Africa as well, because they were both British colonies. So like there's segregation across the board. So like Indians are segregated from Africans, are segregated from white people, and there's like different classifications of segregation, basically apartheid. When the ANC did these sort of actions, oftentimes their leaders would get banned, which is basically a type of government censorship, which means you lose freedom of speech. You aren't like in jail or anything, but you can't speak at rallies, you can't do political action, basically. And there's a lot of talk about when should you flex your power and how you should flex your power. And things like protesting schools, for instance. Yes, the black South Africans could leave the schools, take their kids out of the schools, but who looks after their kids during the day? And what would the alternative education be for those kids? And did the ANC have enough power to educate the kids who are taken out of the school? These were a lot of times questions, and a lot of times these are the important questions to ask when it comes to power. And if you do a boycott of the schools and you have very few people join, that's actually a very bad way to flex your power and use your power and try to implement change. So there's a lot of talks about things like that. Mandela goes from being banned to unbanned to banned again. And Mandela is working as a law clerk with his friend Oliver Tambo, who is also part of the struggle. And we're starting to, meet a lot of different people who are in the struggle. And there's sometimes ideological talks like, should you as a movement be nonviolent on the principle of nonviolence, or should you be nonviolent because optically being nonviolent is better than being violent in terms of getting people to your cause? And the ANC's position was to be nonviolent because optically it was better, but there was spirited debates about that, and some of the Indian political leaders, obviously India had a different view on nonviolence. They were nonviolent, and Gandhi, of course, was nonviolent because they had a principled stance against any violence, full stop. And this book does a great job of presenting those things in a way that's pretty easy to read about. It's not pages of debates about principles of nonviolence. Mandela's very good at outlining the disagreement in a paragraph and then just saying the outcome and saying people's views on the outcome pretty briefly. And Mandela was very good at doing the mediating, and obviously he has his principles and his opinions, but again, themes of listening, cooperation, communication. And yeah, we watch Mandela develop into a great leader of the ANC. But yes, eventually the South African government doesn't really like Mandela and the other leaders of the ANC being so skilled at developing a movement against them. So they do all sorts of lawsuits. And I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of these lawsuits here, but they were more or less bogus, or at least in a country with political freedoms, I see them as bogus. But obviously in a nationalist, white supremacist country where a self-proclaimed nationalist and white supremacist party has full control of the government, maybe they're not legally bogus, but obviously they're morally bogus. So that goes through the courts, and I love actually all this legal stuff. It felt like a legal thriller, to be honest, because honestly, I didn't know what was going to happen because I'm not an expert at legal proceedings in South Africa in the 1960s or the 1950s, whenever these things happened. These lawsuits took years and years because of various things. And I will say one thing that I found pretty funny. There was a time when Mandela was not allowed to talk to his lawyers for an extended period of time, and this was a trial with Mandela and 27 other people. So they had to waste time for 6 months until they could talk to their lawyers again. I forget why it was 6 months exactly. Basically, what they did was they would call each other to the stand, and everyone could call a witness, and then that witness could cross-examine all the others. So everyone would just call each other to the stand and keep cross-examining each other. And it was just hilarious ridiculousness. I mean, obviously it's not a funny situation, but Mandela actually has a good sense of humor. So that comes through in some of the pages of these books. To be fair, Mandela actually has a good sense of humor, and he has a good way of staying relentlessly positive and good-spirited. So I did find myself laughing at some things that, maybe are very bleak situations, just because that's the kind of person Mandela was. And he kind of rubs off on people too, his sort of human spirit, I guess you could say, or just his general personality. But yeah, then Mandela goes overseas, and that is interesting. He goes throughout Africa and he gets support from various African governments, and then he goes to Europe, and then the European countries don't really like him and don't really want to help him because the apartheid government is a huge business partner for them. So yeah, of course, this is an example of money and moneyed interest breaking towards fascism because money. And Mandela did get some support from the Soviet Union and Cuba and various other places that were kind of against the Western hegemony. So it's interesting to see that sometimes the villains of the world can do the right thing, and sometimes the heroes of the world can do the wrong thing. It adds a lot of nuance to some people's views of history, I think. But yes, international solidarity, it's important. We'll come back to it a little later. But yes, then he comes back to South Africa, and they have determined the non-violent struggle not really working. So Mandela becomes the leader of the military wing of the ANC, and Mandela knows nothing about this, of course, so he has to read on it and kind of organize an army to do sabotage missions and stuff. And he wanted to obviously avoid outright warfare because he would have less power and weapons and stuff. And obviously he also wanted to avoid terrorism because he didn't want to target civilians. So he wanted to do things like raids and sabotage and guerrilla warfare tactics and stuff like that. And we don't get too much detail on that because Mandela shortly after is captured by the authorities and he goes to prison, basically. And if you don't know, Mandela is in prison for 27 years, so this goes through that. And it's interesting because when he gets there, they have rules for prisoners where white prisoners and Indians get to wear pants, but black prisoners get to wear shorts. So there's a fight of injustice right away, where Mandela's like, this is unacceptable. And then he's given pants, but then only he's given pants. So he's like, this is still unacceptable. And he gets everyone pants. So this is great. And by pants, I mean trousers. I think he says trousers, but I'm thinking pants, but full pants, trousers, whatever. And yeah, I think a lot of the stuff from prison is also interesting to read about, even though prison, it doesn't seem like something that would be exciting or interesting to read about. But the struggle was still going on outside of prison, so Mandela trying to get information about the struggle was interesting because he wasn't really allowed to get information. There was a funny moment where they were allowed to get reading, just nothing about history or news or anything like that. But they were able to get The Economist, which is a newspaper that, talks about the news and stuff. Or it's a magazine, I think. It's a magazine, right? But apparently it got through the prison guards because they thought it was about economics. So they got that for a few weeks or months, and then someone figured out that they shouldn't be getting this. And yeah, the prison guards rotated around a lot. They would be on Robben Island, which is where the prison was, for maybe 6 months or 2 years or something, but then they'd go somewhere else. One of their leaders of the prison was openly white nationalist and swastika face tattoos and stuff, clear and obvious Nazi. And he was also a complete dumbass, so -2 points for white supremacism there. But yeah, I mean, they would openly mock this guy, which is awesome. But at the same time, it's a kind of scary situation to be non-white with a white nationalist as the head of the prison that you're currently at. And Mandela just valued respect and dignity a lot. And if the prison guards and prison and the heads of the prison and stuff would treat him with dignity, he would be more likely to try to help him. And he always wanted to be treated like a political prisoner, not like a slave mine worker, which was part of his struggle. And I know there's a quote that says, if you want to know the moral fabric of a nation, look at their prisons. And I don't know who said that or where that was said, but I definitely thought about that because obviously there's a large part of this book that is from within prison. But yeah, then Mandela gets out eventually because of international pressure. So Mandela gets out. There's like huge gatherings where he speaks at these huge rallies. This in the 2020 presidential primary. Joe Biden actually lied at being at the rally when Mandela got out, which was like really bizarre. But again, similar to capital and business interests not wanting to ruffle the feathers in South Africa during apartheid, the business interests of large multinational media conglomerates and other, mainstream media personalities didn't really want to harp away on Joe Biden's lies, really, about this particular event. But yeah, I digress. But do I really digress? At the end of the day, this book is about a long walk to freedom, and this walk is not over. We are still on the long walk to freedom. Yes, this was a big victory of overthrowing apartheid, and yes, Mandela working with the nationalist government to implement freedoms when it comes to voting and political office, and the ANC being like a legal political party. Obviously, that's very important, and it was an amazing victory. And it goes to show that if Nelson Mandela can sit down and have respectful conversations with open nationalist parties, then hopefully you can sit down and keep your head level when you are talking to your Trump uncle during the holidays about potentially heated political topics. But yes, let's talk about freedom. Let's talk about that theme. Let's talk about how this is a struggle that will continue to persist. Quote, "It was this desire for the freedom of my people to live their lives with dignity and self-respect that animated my life. I am no more virtuous or self-sacrificing than the next man, but I found that I could not even enjoy the poor and limited freedoms I was allowed when I knew my people were not free. Freedom is indivisible. The chains on any one of my people were the chains on all of them. The chains on all of my people were the chains on me." But yeah, we are all part of a history, and we are all part of a struggle, and that means struggling to keep the freedoms that we have and hopefully struggling to get more freedoms. And yeah, freedom is tied to these virtues and themes that I spoke about earlier. Are you, as an individual, really free if you are full of fear and hatred? If you are not resilient enough to handle the tragedies of life, cooperative enough to work with others, forgiving enough of others when they make mistakes, or communicative enough to find love with others? And in many ways, this kind of felt like a self-help book in a good way, where it talks about these things like resiliency and ties them into the struggle that a lot of people are going through, and it ties us together. Or at least that's how I felt while reading it. And I feel like Mandela's story probably touches a lot of individuals in that sort of way, hopefully. But more important than these sort of individual freedoms are the freedoms of the society, of course. Like, think about the white people in South Africa. Are they free if they are in constant fear of the people who they're oppressing rising up and taking revenge against them? These are the fears that the Nationalist Party played on towards the white people of South Africa. The fear of retribution. It's a very common talking point within the group of oppressors, whether it be in South Africa or, other colonialist powers. But yeah, is that fear freedom? Mandela would argue no. As he says, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffer. Okay, no, guys. That was Yoda. Okay, I'll tell you what he actually said, because it's actually kind of similar, to be honest, but I guess you could judge for yourself. It was during those long and lonely years that my hunger for the freedom of my own people became a hunger for freedom of all people, white and black. I knew as well as I knew anything that the oppressor must be liberated as surely as the oppressed. A man who takes away another man's freedoms is a prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. I am not truly free if I'm taking away someone else's freedoms, just as surely as I am not free when my freedom is taken away from me. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. But yes, freedom is, of course, a noble thing to struggle for. Many fantasy books are about freedom. And actually, the context of that Star Wars quote, think about Star Wars and think about Anakin. His fear was on behalf of his mother, who was still enslaved. And that fear enslaved him as well. And those fears are what the Emperor preyed upon to make Anakin abandon his morals in favor of his fears. And perhaps Anakin at one point thought he would become more free. That is not the case. He became a servant and puppet to a brutal dictatorial emperor. The route of fear is never the route to freedom, though I can understand in some cases, like Anakin's, how it can be compelling. Certainly I know people who worry about their parents. Certainly I know people in the real world who, like Anakin, worry about their parents' health and well-being. If they get sick, will they be able to afford health care? And these people themselves can afford health care, but they're not free if we all can't afford health care. It's not freedom to live in a society where we are bombarded from GoFundMes daily from our friends, family, friends of friends, relatives, friends, etc. If they're always asking for money for healthcare, this is something that our society can solve, and other countries' societies have solved, and it exemplifies why the walk for freedom is not over. But we do have suffrage. South Africa now also has suffrage. Freedom is definitely incremental, and the steps in this book, of course, steps in the right direction, and they were great steps, hard-fought for steps, and honestly amazing to read about. But like I said, I will come back to international solidarity now. Where are some places that have not achieved suffrage and still have apartheid qualities? Obviously, like China has a one-party state and oppresses minority groups and puts them in concentration camps, like the Uyghur Muslims. Obviously, there's plenty of self-proclaimed theocratic monarchies, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, etc. The one that I want to be very clear about, and the one that oftentimes people either misinterpret or intentionally dishonestly invoke Nelson Mandela's name and other anti-apartheid leaders in South Africa, is Palestine. Make no mistake, Israel-Palestine is an apartheid state right now. They have different IDs, different classifications under the law. Palestinians can't vote in Israeli elections, even though they're within Israel. Israel keeps cutting the amount of Palestinian land that they have. They keep having illegal settlements under UN law, and they're illegal under international law, the settlements. Every human rights group has properly identified this as an apartheid situation. But it's very likely that your congressperson in the United States does not see it that way. And this ties into Mandela, because after this book came out and after Mandela's term as president, he gave a speech and he said, "But we know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of Palestinians." And this was in 1997 when the apartheid was less drastic. And yeah, this is true bravery on the part of Nelson Mandela. He gains nothing from standing up for Palestinians, but the time is always right to do what is right, and Mandela did, and many of the South African leaders, such as Desmond Tutu and Mbeki, and basically everyone who struggled against apartheid in South Africa, recognizes that what's going on in Palestine is very similar, and very disturbing. And actually, in a lot of ways, it parallels the Black Lives Matter movement here. Obviously, we don't have apartheid here right now, which is great. But in terms of brutality of the police here towards African Americans and brutality of Israeli defense forces against Palestinians, and the lack of accountability that, like in situations of pure civilian targeted violence, just totally non-existent accountability. And the reason why it's important to stand up for Palestine is very similar to here in South Africa, where the international community sided with South Africa's government, mostly because of business interest, and there was no real advantage and no real lobbying of any sort of significance to stand up for the ANC and Nelson Mandela in South Africa. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely parallels there to Israel-Palestine now. But yeah, I'm going to try to continue reading books like this. This was, in a lot of ways, one of the favorite books I read last year. I finished it like right at the end of the year, and I'd recommend this to anyone. So definitely pick it up. Join my Discord or give your thoughts in the comment section. Obviously, there's like crazy apartheid denial lists when it comes to Israel, so I'm sure I'm going to get a few comments about that. I welcome your hatred. But I will end with a little bit of fun. Mandela died around 10 years ago, and it was obviously tragic. But speaking of people incorrectly interpreting Mandela's views on freedoms and various issues around the globe, on the day of his death, Rick Santorum, a Republican in the United States, compared his struggle against the Affordable Care Act to Nelson Mandela's struggle against apartheid. And it led to like the funniest impression from Michael Brooks, where he had this character called Right-Wing Mandela. And it was just so funny. I'll post a link of the clips and this review with one of those clips. I know my review's been all over the place, but trust me, this is very funny. So check it out.
A couple years ago, more relevant in the real proper founding of Right-Wing Mandela, we heard a clip of Rick Santorum claim that fighting Obamacare was the moral equivalent of what Mandela was doing in fighting apartheid. And I sat there and I went, Rick is quite right. And ever since then, it's been a character.
And Mandela comes out and he's like, of all of the injustices in the world, that could remind me of the struggle against apartheid. The delivery of health care through a private market mechanism. None could face the same level of injustice and tyranny that Americans face by having an inconvenient website so that they are covered in a catastrophic situation. You should fight this.
Now, I want to know, when's Rick Santorum going to go into prison for 27 years to fight this? Unbelievable.
The names, Santorum, Gingrich, and other heroes of the struggle against the slightly expanded Medicaid. You will go down in history along with Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, and other great comrades who have fought evil and justice.
How demented are these people?
So demented.
It's so much better if they could just say Mandela was a communist. Screw him.
Oh,
I mean, my God.
right.
Sam, I am troubled by a lack of seriousness in the GOP field that I see.
Really?
All of these candidates are true patriots who clearly would like to save America from the destructive liberal socialist tendencies of President Obama. However, I see a lack of seriousness when it comes to foreign policy and family values that is lacking in the field.
Really? What is it that you feel is lacking specifically?
I think, as I say, a measure of seriousness when it came to foreign policy and a willingness to confront the Islamic threat. See, many people don't recognize, Sam, that there is evil in the world.
No, I think people, I think that's probably
And I think
true.
if you look at my
You don't think that the
unique
Republican
experience set and skills that I bring to the table, as I
So wait a
continue,
second. Are you suggesting that you,
I know that-
right-wing Nelson Mandela, are going to run for the Republican primary nomination?
I know that liberal hosts like to interrupt and be disrespectful, and I will be painted into a corner. Comments I made about Buju Banton being correct about gay people will be distorted. All sorts of things will come my way. But I have received a message from God saying that I must run.
So God
So
is
it
the-
is today that I am announcing later that I will formally create an exploratory committee to see if a run could be what this country needs to save it from creeping socialism.
Wow.
An open border and terrorists at our front door who do no longer believe in American strength.
It is breaking news. Right-wing Nelson Mandela has announced that later today he will announce that he's going to announce an exploratory committee.
An exploratory, that is correct.
I'm sorry. What is your name, sir?
Hello, this is John Miller.
John Miller. Okay.
Yes, I'm speaking on. Things are going so great for him right now, so he does not have time to speak.
For Nelson
all of
Mandela.
Yes, this
Well,
is correct.
I mean, okay.
I'm someone who's worked in many African political parties. I think he likes me. I think he trusts me. So I'm just going to be sort of handling some of this.
So you're his what? You're his spokesperson.
Yeah, spokesperson, so to speak. And, you can see all these things because there's so much press. They say
Well,
he wants
Nelson
to
Mandela
get...
does get a lot of
they
press,
say he
it's
wants
true.
to get back together with Winnie. He has no interest in getting back together with Winnie. He doesn't want to be with Winnie at all. I mean, it's a complete lie. But they do these things. And he says, even if they say he wants to get back with Winnie, it's still good press.
Right.
It's amazing.
Well, so wait, I'm sorry. So you're suggesting, I'm sorry, you said your name was John Miller?
This is John Miller.
And so you're suggesting, you seem to have a real intimate working knowledge of Nelson Mandela's thoughts, I mean, about fairly intimate things.
Well, as I say, I think he trusts me. I think I'm someone who he likes. I think I'm someone who he trusts. This sort of thing. And, everything is so complicated right now. They're reporting in the press that he wants to date Ariana Grande. Meanwhile, she is DMing him on Instagram, and he is not interested. He could be not more or less no interest. None.
So if I understand what you're saying correctly.
He doesn't want to date Ariana Grande.